Hi, everybody. Hope you're off to a great start to your week. We just wrapped up our Scoop broadcast. This is our special live broadcast that we do on Monday for our insiders. These are the folks who have chosen to support Smarter News. You'll notice most of what we're putting out there into the world, we don't have advertisement attached to, in part because we just don't want the clutter. And we want to make sure that we're able to streamline delivering quick, concise, nonpartisan news to you. So our insider community is a special community that gets a cheat sheet once a week on Mondays and gets invited to this special broadcast, and we get to answer questions live. And in general, we just have like a nice conversation about the news over coffee. So it's a little bit different format than you'll see, whether you're watching television or watching streaming. It's just a more casual, more intimate way for us to look through the news together. So we were able to spend a little time doing that today, and we were able to spend some time with Hollie McKay. She's the war correspondent and writer who we have relied on for years in her travels all over the world to bring us a perspective we won't hear anywhere else, including in Ukraine, because she was there when the invasion started and has been absolutely integral to us understanding the conflict. So what we did today is we actually worked through the final 10 minutes of the meeting between President Trump and President Zelenskyy. And you'll see that we started and stopped, and we added some historical context when needed, and we took your questions live when needed. And it was an interesting way to work through what is undoubtedly a historic event. So I hope you enjoy it. This is just a little sneak of our Scoop broadcast. If you are thinking you'd like to help support us here at Smarter News, continue to deliver quick, concise, nonpartisan news, becoming an insider is a great way to do it. Not only do you get that cheat sheet at the beginning of the week, so you can kind of look at it, understand what to expect, and kind of let it all go. But we also do these live events together, which come in really handy more now than ever before, because we're dealing with a lot of history making stories on a regular basis. And it's such a privilege to be able to work through them together. So without further ado, I started asking Hollie, where was she when we started to watch this meeting between President Trump and President Zelenskyy start going in a different direction? And we pick up there with how things felt at the beginning, and then you'll hear how things felt at the end. Have a great day. What went through your mind when you saw this exchange between President Trump and the Ukrainian president?
Yeah, so I was watching it, and then people started messaging me. It's certainly unprecedented. I will say these things do happen, behind closed doors. What's unprecedented about it is that it happened so openly in a press briefing, which is something that is very rare. My view on it, based on my experience of working in Ukraine during the invasion, before the invasion, I think just overall in the approach that I like to take as a journalist is leading with empathy and always trying to put myself in the shoes of other people that I'm reporting on, and sort of, trying to kind of dig a little bit deeper than just my own, position or political viewpoint. And you have to look at, President Zelenskyy, understand that this has been going for 3 years. Can you imagine being at war, leading a country, being personally under threat for 3 years? The stress, the constant barrage of trying to get money, of dealing with, the deaths of just tens of thousands of people, the amount of turmoil and that is built up inside of you. And so I have to look at that and think he just must be absolutely exhausted. And he's really seeing his country through this, and he is going to go in there and try to put his needs of the country first. And, as this exchange is happening, I think that his intention was really trying to make the president sort of understand that it wasn't his country that started this. No matter what sort of pro-Putin talking points Trump lately has been espousing, Zelenskyy was trying to get him to see it from his point of view, which is a very deeply personal place compared to sort of where Trump and Vance were seated. They haven't been in Ukraine. They haven't been in the trenches for 3 years. They haven't had to watch, mass portions of their country lose their lives and livelihoods. So it's a very deeply personal thing for Zelenskyy. And I think we have to look at what happened from that lens.
Gretchen had a great question. She said, would it have looked and sounded different if it had been behind closed doors? That's one thing I've wondered. What was different because of the audience? And I want to bring this out, Gretchen, because it's such a great point. It's what we saw. There were so many different dynamics at play. As Hollie's mentioning, we have this deeply personal perspective coming from President Zelenskyy. You have a new administration trying to establish themselves on the world stage that have made a promise that they're trying to keep here for better or for worse or for different opinions. And that promise is we're going to bring this war to an end. But there's the role of the press in this as well. And in this sitting situation that they had in the Oval Office, they're on these couches, right? You've seen this a million times. It's because this is where everyone gathers as they're heading into a meeting behind closed doors. And in a very typical situation, this is like a 7-minute exchange. President Trump would say something, President Zelenskyy could say something, and then there might be one or two questions, and then everybody goes behind closed doors. I'm always for more transparency and accessibility for the audience. However, there is a point where you can bake the cake too long, where you're kind of chewing over different topics that you've chewed over before. And at the 40-minute mark of this meeting, which again, typically in previous administrations could be like 5, 6, 7 minutes, now we're reaching the point where the risk is very high and the benefit is really low. And I've been thinking a lot about that because more is not always better. As a journalist, I always want that more access. But the President Trump has done this in these early meetings, doing these long press availabilities. That's his style. He loves the press. He may say he hates the press, fake news, but he does like to engage with the press.
He's a showman, absolutely.
Right?
In fact, his comment when it ended was, well, that was great television.
Totally. We're going to hear it from him in a second. This is the way almost that he warms up. And this is the way he likes positioning himself. I'm not even completely not convinced this is just all part of this is part of the way that he sort of like an athlete, you got an athlete that wants to do 2 hours of stretching and sprints before they play. I almost think that that's what President Trump like. It's a completely different way than other presidents. So that was also a dynamic here, because if you watch the first 40 minutes, it was sort of regular, and a regular exchange. It wasn't that there wasn't some clear differences, but it went okay, right, Hollie?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a regular sort of exchange. And I think that, in my opinion, in Zelenskyy trying to make, Trump understand. And I think the comment that really sort of set him off was, him saying it will affect you in the future, because Trump has continuously said, this is Europe's problem. And yes, we are divided, by a big body of water. But what Zelenskyy was trying to articulate was that we will feel it, in the sense that if you empower Russia to, be your quote unquote friend and basically do what they want in the region and be able to go in and to other countries and essentially win as a result of that, then that will come back to bite America at some point in time, because Russia really isn't our trusted friend.
Right.
And I think that is what Zelenskyy was trying to say. And I think with Vice President Vance, and then that really set sort of Trump off on a trajectory, which I think, in my opinion, was sort of overblown. And I don't think it was sort of any huge disrespect for President Zelenskyy to try to communicate that. I mean,
well, we had a language barrier, though. And when that comment came up in question 2, that, you guys have this ocean between you, to an American audience, that could sound like a little bit of a threat. Like, you don't know, you had problems at the beginning. Let's listen to it. Let's listen to the whole thing. And Hollie, you can even give me like a little like thumbs up. In this, I get a thumbs up. You can give if you want to stop. I'm going to stop it periodically, but there's a few of our audience members that haven't seen the whole thing. Some are asking a question about whether or not we believe this was a setup. Like, was this planned? And I'll be curious your thoughts on that. But let's just pick up. So President Trump is sort of finishing a question. And it's kind of the same sort of, I don't want to say the same sort of stuff that they've chewed over again for the last, half an hour about Russia and the way forward, and what to say about Russia and what language to use to talk about Russia, the whole thing. So let me go ahead and add this, and we'll kind of start and stop. And if anyone on the live chat wants to stop, just also make a comment.
With Putin, I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America, and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world. and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
I will respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire, all of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he...
Let me just stop there. Holly, can you fill us in? What he's talking about something very specific, and it brings us back, doesn't it, to 2014, when many say this is when the war actually began. But what is he discussing here? This has a name where there was a whole slew of agreements that transpired. Can you give us a little background on what he's talking about here?
Yeah, well, what he's talking about is something called the Minsk Agreement, or Minsk II, as it was known. And it was basically a peace deal that was aimed at ending the conflict that was happening in Ukraine, and then the areas in Donetsk that were basically, it was a war being waged by Russian-backed separatists. And that was signed. And the idea of that was that there was going to be an immediate ceasefire, that there would be a withdrawal of heavy weapons, there would be a prisoner exchange between all the hostages, there would be dialogue on elections, there would be a withdrawal of foreign fighters. So essentially all foreign military forces, including Russian troops, were to leave Ukrainian territory. But as you can see, that really never happened, that the fighting continued, and the ceasefire was basically immediately violated and continued to be violated. And that was really due in part because Russia formally denied direct involvement in the conflict. They said, these separatists are not ours, even though it was very clear and very blatant to the international community that they were funding these separatists and supplying them with the weapons they needed to continue the war. So there really was a lack of political will, and the West sort of continued to impose sanctions, and tensions continued all the way through to that full-scale invasion in early 2022.
That's such important background, especially the part about the separatists. And I forgot about that, Holly. It was such a key point. We talked about it actually with David Satter last week about the passenger plane, the Malaysian Airlines plane that was shot down over Ukraine. And everyone looked at Russia as being to blame for that because it is still believed that a Russian-backed separatist group was the one that shot the plane out of the sky. But Russia said, "Don't look at us. It's not us. Those are just people fighting for their territory. That's not who we are. We're not involved officially." And so that's why it is really important as we then fast forward to this current
and to give it
conflict.
context, it's sort of like Iran saying, "Oh, well, we have nothing to do with Hezbollah." We think you do.
Right. Right. It's like, it's kind of ridiculous. And at the same time, it's a stopping point, because if one side says, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about," then you can't actually have an agreement. You actually aren't having a negotiation in good faith, because all the parties are not at the table. What makes this most recent invasion of Ukraine all the more important is that it was Russia. It wasn't some, dark separatist group.
Was it
Russia's
the little
coming
green
in.
men that they'd used in the past? Yeah.
Exactly. So this is what Zelensky's talking about here. And he's raising a really important point. Hey, we've tried this. By the way, you guys were all doing your other stuff. Like, we were still at war. We've been at war for a long time. And we've done all these things.
Go ahead and sign an agreement, but don't expect that it's going to be followed.
Yes, and he also name dropped there. Hey, I had the Germany's leader with me. I had France's leader with me. I had everybody with me. And guess what? No one held this guy accountable. So what's different this time? So this is really what he's saying. So let's go ahead and listen to what happens next.
Didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
Can I just stop for a second? I do think it is interesting that he said JD. He didn't say Vice President Vance. And I don't know how that played, but it is noticeable to me because no one looked at him and said Volodymyr. Everyone says President Zelensky. And I wonder, again, I'm not a forensic psychologist, but I wonder in that moment when he's referring to the vice president by the first name, if also that kind of plays into this next result, by the vice president. Let's watch.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have.
Oh, Holly, I wanted to know what you thought here, because President Zelensky is like, "Oh yeah, when's the last time you've been in Ukraine?" Vice President Vance.
And he's asking him, Vice President Vance is asking him to thank them when they've been vocally against Ukraine on the campaign trail and through to now. And he's saying, "Well, thank us." And he's like, "Well, what am I thanking you for? You've been very vocally against Ukraine for a long time." So I can understand, the hostility there too. What is he asking them to thank him for?
Well, and so now as the train starts to jump the tracks, let's keep listening.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
Okay, President Trump's going to jump in here. I wonder, Holly, if there is a little bit of a language barrier here. I don't want to just kind of pass things off in a language barrier, but when he's sitting back with his arms crossed and he's like, "Just wait, it's going to come for you," it can feel like it's a threat, rather than him trying to make a point of, "Hey, this is our country.
Sure.
You guys aren't there." Did you ever see any, or have you heard any of the reports about people being forced in Ukraine into the military to fight?
Honestly, I haven't. I hear that more from propaganda in the United States. I haven't heard it personally from anyone. Ukraine has so many, and this we can get into this. Ukraine has so many people willing to fight for their country that that, if there are conscripts, I can't imagine they would be large in number. If you want to talk fairly about conscripts, talk to Russia. They're the ones that are recruiting people out of prisons, out of rural communities, out of poor communities, and basically forcing them to the front line where they're going to die. I certainly have not heard of that in Ukraine. That's not to say that I know everything and it's not happening, but I've certainly heard more about that from American, propaganda channels than I've heard from any legitimate sources.
Good to know. And it's an important point about Russia, because we do know that that's taking place according to a variety of different sources, including using prisoners, as you mentioned, to push them to the front lines with this idea that military strategy will be based on volume, and the willingness to sacrifice people in that effort. Okay, let's go ahead, and now President Trump is going to jump in.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
I'm not
You're in
dictating.
no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're going to feel very
you will
good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel
I'm-
very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From
it.
the very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I
You don't
was
have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
Right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think
You're
you-
gambling with World War III.
What you're
You're
thinking
gambling
about?
with
What you're
World
thinking
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm
That's
with
back
all
to
respect to
you.
your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America.
Jenna?
Yes, go ahead, Holly.
Yeah, so that point there, that again, that's sort of been blown into a thing. I think it was last September, October, President Zelenskyy went to Pennsylvania, to Scranton, I believe, which is a mining town, and basically thanking the people there. And that was viewed by some Republicans as being some sort of campaign stop, but there was never a mention of politics. He never, he was never on the campaign trail saying, vote for Democrats. Politics didn't come up, but the act of going there, was seen, by some as being a campaigning for the opposition. But that, that's very
Okay.
much a wild interpretation.
Well, I understand the point. I also think in order to fairly portray this, Pennsylvania is also a very key state in any election. This is also the hometown area of President Biden, and the Democrats have and Republicans fight for leverage in this state. So the timing of this visit, where it was, it's very difficult to not look at it with a political lens, considering that. But to your point, I'm just going to read, this is from the Associated Press from September of last year. Under tight security, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Sunday visited a Pennsylvania ammunition factory to thank the workers who are producing one of the most critical needed munitions for his country's fight to fend off Russian ground forces. Representative Matt Cartwright, a Democrat who was among those who met with Zelenskyy at the Scranton Army ammunition plant, said the president had a simple message: thank you, and we need more. And so it goes on. So this is why this was viewed as a political visit, even if it wasn't supposed to be that way, because also the Democrats had a platform of continuing more and more aid and support to Ukraine, while President Trump's platform was, we're going to do something different and we got to negotiate a peace. So it is for Vice President Vance to bring this up now, though, feels a little perhaps off topic.
It's like, thank us, but then don't thank us when it's not directly at us. It's very convoluted.
Yes. So, but good point. I think it's good to have both of those. No, hey, this wasn't a campaign visit. President Zelenskyy wasn't on stage, from what I remember. I mean, I'm like, did I not? A lot happened during the election season, but if you heard Vice President Vance say that, you might think he was campaigning next to Kamala Harris, and this was at this plant for this particular reason, hard not to see it through a political lens because of the timing, but also not a traditional political event like you may imagine. So we got to hold all of the things together at one time. Okay, let's continue.
And the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not
Yeah.
speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank-
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak-
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of
except
times
that there,
thank you
except
to
that-
American people.
Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're
I
saying
said-
you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a
with
ceasefire.
guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what-
That
what
wasn't
this
with me.
means. It
That was with
wasn't with
a
you.
guy named Biden who was not a smart person.
This
That
is
was
your,
with, that
this
was
is
with
your
Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Vice President.
Oh my gosh, at this point, I'm like, do not take another question for goodness sakes. You guys, I have watched this. How many times have I watched this? Even while I don't know if you're noticing my body language, it's so hard to watch. And in part, Holly, because there are so many different opportunities for it just to stop. If one person stood up and said, you know what, this is why we need to have frank conversations together face to face. And that only happens here at the White House, anything to get them away from the cameras. And here I'm a journalist and I want the cameras rolling, but
Because
still, I can't
it's
help.
uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable.
Who wins out of that exchange is Putin. He wins out of
Right.
that exchange. America doesn't
Yeah.
look great. Ukraine doesn't look great. Putin gets what he wants. That's
There
who's
isn't-
the victor.
First of all, excellent point, because guess who's been quiet and hasn't said a lot? Vladimir Putin. And suddenly he looks like the adult, right? And that's not a good scene. We know that. We know that lawmakers are considering Russia being a state sponsor of terrorism. Like that's not a good win for anyone, that Vladimir Putin comes out like more reserved and refined as far as manners goes versus what we're seeing here. There is something important here, and there's been a little bit of a point of contention, depending on what reports that you see, about a couple things. And I'm going to let the rest of this play out and we can continue talking about it, about whether or not President Zelenskyy actually wants to pause the fighting, if there is actually a peace deal on the table, right, Holly? Like whether or not there's a ceasefire deal that Ukraine really wants to stop. And what I believe, my interpretation of these reports, just by having seen this story play out over the last couple of years, is that he's also balancing the politics at home, which is that, yes, people are exhausted of war, but as you mentioned, they're ready to fight for their survival. So it's not just like a peace deal, like, hey, we're just going to have a timeout. It has to be something real. And I wonder, when they're saying peace deal or ceasefire, if they're all imagining the same thing, or
Yeah.
whether or not they're actually thinking of different things. And that's part of the problem here. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm being clear.
I think, when you've seen these things play out before and it hasn't worked, you're going to approach things with a high level of skepticism. President Trump is desperate to get a deal. That's, the sole sort of feeder of his ego and what he wants. And I think that in doing so, he has and let's go back into a little bit of context. He has a very strong bond with President Putin, going back to the impeachment days when he saw Zelenskyy in Ukraine and Hunter Biden and Burisma, and that whole scandal really as being a massive thorn, in his presidency and what he viewed as corruption. And so ever since then, I think that he has certainly, not been a big fan of Zelenskyy, but has certainly felt much more of a bond with Putin as opposed to Zelenskyy. And we're sort of seeing this, I guess, play out. On one hand, I can definitely, understand that this war, Ukraine isn't winning. They don't look like winning. And there aren't many solutions for them because I think things will continue to get more dire, but is just kind of kowtowing to the enemy, going to be a plausible, peace agreements only work when they're going to work long term. And is a peace agreement just because it sounds great right now? Is it going to actually be viable on the ground? And is it going to stay? Because what is the point of an agreement that isn't going to stay? And I think those questions aren't always being weighed up in these policy decisions. But again, going back to that point of empathy, I mean, can you imagine if somebody broke into your house and killed half your family and stole half your things and said, hey, I won't come back and kill any more members of your family or steal anything else, if you agree to let me keep what I already have. Is that fair either? So I think, just from his point of view, it's, it's going to be so much more emotionally charged, than it is for Trump, who is just kind of desperate to get a deal and appear as the hero in all of this.
Well, I'm going to play some sound as well from Secretary Rubio that will take on kind of what you're saying, which is Secretary Rubio in a subsequent interview said, listen, at a certain point, the plan here cannot be hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine and indefinite war. That can't be the other option. And so how do we work towards something that's different than that? And that's in his way, Secretary Rubio is saying that's how we're going to advocate for the American people and also try to bring about peace. To your point, though, how does that work? If it's your family and it's your home and those are your things and those are your people, how do you turn the page to something new? It's very difficult. Okay, we're going to finish this out, and then we got some great questions, Holly. So let's go ahead and just play. We'll get to the end. We'll be able to put it to bed, and then we'll move forward.
It's going to be a tough deal to make because the attitudes have to change.
What if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do you do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
Well, what if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin.
Do you see Zelensky's face when he gave like a like
yeah,
like,
but I mean that is the frustrating point of Trump's MO is that so much of his decision making comes from a point of trying to deride anyone who came before him, Democrats who came before him. That I think that it clouds the vision. Clouds everything.
And you see that shrug from Zelensky, like, well, okay.
Where they used him and Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam.
Okay, I'm going to skip forward here.
Broken him with Biden. He did, maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened, but he didn't break him with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right. We'll see what we can do about putting it together. Thank you.
So Kathy's bringing it up. She said, I would love to know what President Zelenskyy is actually thinking. And I'd love to know that too, Holly, in that moment. Like, what at that moment did he realize this is all falling apart? Or I wonder if he knew at that moment. And I wonder if he
I'm
cared
pretty
too.
sure I mean, he kind of thought that it went well. He kind of thought that it went well, but I guess at the same token, you know, could have he just said nothing, and would that have been okay too? You know,
Right. Well, remember, he has his own audience too,
yeah,
which is the people that he's supposed to represent, which is, and perhaps that's what he was thinking about, which is I can't sit here and let my people be talked about that way. So,
Yeah.
you know, and that maybe gave him more, allowed him to kind of, to confront, I don't even know if it, engage on these different topics. What do you think the effect would be when President Trump says, you know, you're a tough guy now because you have us, but if you don't have us, what if the United States just said, we're out, like, we're not giving you any more military equipment, no more money? What happens?
I mean, I think the onus then really does fall to Europe. And Zelenskyy, after leaving Washington, D.C., did go to London and had other meetings with European officials where he was very warmly embraced. And, you know, they were sort of essentially advocating that they were proud of him for sort of standing up. And so I think that, the onus would fall back to Russia to continue to, you know, to fund and supply weapons to Ukraine. And, you know, at that point, that would be on them to either negotiate some sort of end to the war or to sort of blindly continue. Yeah.
And there's a question about what does that support look like from Europe? Exactly. Janelle had a great question. She said, Holly, do you think putting the proposed American workers in Ukraine will deter Putin? And just for a little background on this. Well, these are not. So the idea here, and again, we don't have specifics. The Secretary of Treasury said that the press was actually misrepresenting this rare earths deal, and that it was going to be more of an economic partnership deal where rare earths apparently were going to be part of it, that we would have mining of some sort. We don't know. We don't have any of the specifics yet. The way President Trump had been talking about this deal over the last week, though, is that he was suggesting that if American companies and people are on the ground for economic reasons, then Vladimir Putin would not be as aggressive in those areas. They're not peacekeepers. They're not military. He'd leave that to the UK to do. But if we had Americans on the ground, Vladimir Putin's not going to bomb where the Americans are, and therefore, de facto, it would prevent further conflict. And that's what Janelle, I believe, is asking about. What do you think about that? Would Vladimir Putin not strike areas where American workers were working in mining?
Yeah, I wouldn't totally trust that. You know, you would want to go into that with some agreements, but if there is still sort of active fighting going on, I certainly wouldn't trust that. I don't think Russia's ability to aim or to, you know, protect certain areas their track record is not great for that. So I certainly wouldn't see that as any sort of guarantee unless there was a full-scale end to the conflict where Russian troops withdrew. You know, then you might have some safeguards. But if there is any sort of ongoing conflict, then that would not be, I don't think that would be a viable position to put American workers.
By the way, spoken like a true war correspondent, which is, yeah, we'll see if they can aim that well. We all have this idea that like, oh, you know, they'll be able to precision target these certain areas, but not where the Americans are. And it's just, war doesn't work that way. War is chaotic. You can speak to that. I cannot, Holly, but living with a veteran who talks about how war is not like the movies and being able to talk to you and your experience have been very helpful, because otherwise there is that impression that, oh, things can be so precise, you won't be hurt, you know, when that's really asking for a lot of good things to go right, when that's not the way life works, unfortunately. Stephanie has a great question. Can we define winning? Holly, how would you define winning in this?
Well, I think when you're Ukraine, it's hard to define winning because you're the one that has been invaded. But I would say in this particular context, the way that I would define winning would be Russian troops withdrawing, and obviously leaving anything that is considered to be Ukrainian territory. That is how I would define winning. I don't think that it will be any sort of clear-cut win in that way that is going to happen. But I guess that would be Ukraine's sort of hope, is to get their terrain back and have Russian troops withdraw completely from that territory.
Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.